Hello. It is working.
Where's
It's okay.
where's the little thing on it?
Abdullah, what is this thing? It's the box.
Where's the little thing? Okay, all right.
Hello. Hello.
Let's go. No, I don't remember. Sorry. But there's a certain type of immigration that's
I'll present.
You're gonna present?
Yes.
Please say
Surprise
something. This is
presentation
live, by the way.
about New Mexico.
no, wait,
How is it?
like in membership in certain organizations. I should be one of them. That's why I know about it. So I work with a lot of tech and engineering and yeah.
Like this is like a CSE club.
Okay, but like the IEEE is like a really big engineering society, or like
It's a general electrical, electronics.
Assalamu alaikum.
اللهم
How are you doing?
صل على
I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. How are you?
محمد.
Alhamdulillah,
Hello.
alhamdulillah, doing well.
شلونك? Oh, and you can mute it from here.
So the mic's on, guys. So
No, we don't have time. Oh wow.
How do you want me to do
I'll be here. We're gonna do a grab this kid. I think this is the guy I was missing.
Do you want to? Can you start us off? Like introduce us, and can you do the introductions? And then introduce brother Muhammad. He's gonna read some Quran, and then I'll jump in.
You want to start now?
Can you just introduce us? 14 stars, youth program every week. Come by, see us. You know. Eh, Can we get a loud salawat? اللهم صل على محمد وآل
All
محمد.
right, Islamic brothers and sisters, inshallah. May Allah grant you all the blessings and condolences for the martyrdom of Imam Rida alayhi salam. It is actually tonight. Otherwise, we do have, inshallah, a wonderful program today. Our live streaming hopefully is working a lot better. So, inshallah, we'll start with Brother Muhammad Sha'ir, Discourse on Palestine. And then we will continue with historiographical overview of the Zaidis with Brother Ali Mu'mini, and then we'll continue with the continuation of the oneness of God Tawheed lesson with Dr. Muhammad Ja'far. This time we will talk about the proof of God through contingency, and then lastly we'll end with a self-defense series with Brother Ali Surush as well as Brother Karrar, and they'll show us some moves to defend ourselves and gain some confidence. To invite Dr. Muhammad Jafar to recite some verses of the Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Okay, inshallah. Yeah, I guess I'll just sit here then. Yeah. Thanks. Oh no worries. I got it. This is short.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد. Jazakallah khair, Brother Muhammad Jafar. Thank you for beginning us with the verse of the Quran, and I'm going to start. Could we please do a loud salawat? So, thank you all for coming again this week. It's something I love seeing, that we meet every Friday. We've been doing this for a few months now, and every time we come and meet together, it makes me very happy. I love the things we discuss. I love the information and the knowledge that we're sharing together. Alhamdulillah. What I've been trying to do is every week talk about the issue of Palestine, the issue of Palestine, underlying principle or idea. That's the series, right? And some of the underlying principles previous portion of our weekly meetings. So last week, anybody? I like to please be engaged. So what did we talk about last week?
Philosophy of value.
Value. So we were trying to figure out how we value uh, and how right. And so we actually used the four. We actually used the two worldview principles: the worldview and ideology. And we have ideology, and then what are the other things? The four ways of breaking up our epistemology and how we understand and learn things. Does anybody remember the four pieces? There's one of them.
Experience, traditional.
There's the last one, tradition. So we have experience, tradition, mysticism, and what's the last one, guys? Come on.
Reason.
Reason. Okay, thank you. All right. And so when discussing value, we were trying to see how each one of these things can impact our idea of what value things have, right? So if you're capitalist, you're going to give more value to material things, right? Because that's what your worldview is about, right? And your ideology and the actions you take are going to correlate to your worldview. So you're going to seek things, because that's something that we do. We're going to seek things that have value, right? And then we're going to be assigning value to things. And to this week, I want to take it a step further, right? We have value, and then we have judgment, right? And I asked verses of Surah Al-Rahman specifically because there's a verse in the middle of the verses you read. وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ, right? So a rough translation would be uphold the scales with the proper weights and do not decline in the measurements, right? So there's a very specific language used when describing justice, right? So what does the scales usually refer to, right? The scales of justice, when we're trying to decide something, we want to keep it balanced, right? We want to keep that balance, right? But when you're making a judgment, you're assigning value to things within each section, right? And so we gotta make sure that the value we're giving things is its true value, right? And then we gotta look at sources. Where are we deriving our judgments and our values? So we have these sources. So can you guys give me some examples of each one of these as sources we can get to learn things, right? Can we get some examples?
Dreams.
Okay. This should be pretty obvious, guys. Come on, let's get some tradition. What did we just read? Okay, yes, thank you.
Holy books.
Gospel, Quran, Hadith. So this kind of, when we broke down reason, we included logic, which is logical reasoning. And what is there anything else that we can include? Okay. Science. What do you mean by argument? What do you mean by that? Yeah, so let's say, I'm gonna put this here on the side for a second. All right. Can I get some, someone describe experience?
You said friendship, right?
Experiences you have in life. Pretty
Yeah,
straightforward.
so you've done something for a long time.
Yes. Memories.
A priority.
Yes, that's exactly how you can look at it as well. Can you explain those two things?
Yeah, a priority is for experience. A posteriori after.
Okay, so going back to epistemology, where we get our information, right? We're gonna try to make judgments over things. We have to give things the right values, right? And then let me try to bring this back to Palestine, right? How do we decide countries are countries? Like, yeah. Okay, so you're alluding to something called like nation states, where like a certain ethnic group has certain, yeah. So they develop a country based off of this unifying characteristic, right? It's a group of, okay, a government, but so government, all right. We have government, we have nation. Anything else, guys?
This is how we decide countries, right?
Yeah. How are they made? Like, how is it decided that this is a country and this is not a country? We've had a lot of recent countries. South Sudan became a country recently.
Influence, power.
Influence, power.
Like similar perspective.
War, land, conquest, conquest. That's what you're alluding to, conquest, right? So what is the truth is actually stranger than fiction, actually, sometimes. Um, so when I was in law school, one of the things that I enjoyed learning about was the process of establishing a state, right? Because, we grew up in the United States. I am of Palestinian heritage. My parents are immigrants. Um, and this idea of identity and uh, identity of oneself is something we explore. But then you got to look at the identity of a nation, right? So what is making it up? How does it develop? What is government anyway? What is all these things? And so one of the first things you learn in law school in property law is conquest, the right of conquest. So we are looking at case law where Native Americans there's a dispute over land and who it belongs to, and whether Native Americans have the right to sell this land or does someone else have the proper right to sell this land, right? And what is the reasoning used when it's decided who has ownership over this land? It's conquest, right? The native nations lost their claim to this land when they lost the war, right? So through conquest, someone lost a nation, they lost land, and then someone else gained it. That's what happened, right? And then, okay, how that's how I went through the evolution of the United States, right? So I'm gonna give you a quick rundown. United States. It was founded when? When was the first person from the New World found the United States? Christopher Columbus, guys, come on. Come on, Christopher Columbus. 1492, exactly. What was actually something happened at the same time? There was the what? The Moorish expulsion, right? So as soon as the Muslims were kicked out of Spain, there was this vast wealth that the European nations had. They had these ships, they had navigators, and they were able to travel to the New World, right? When the New World was found, I'm saying New World because people were living there. It wasn't new. It was people were living there. It was new to them. So when they got there and they conquered it and they found it, what Christopher Columbus did is that he went to Queen Isabella, and Queen Isabella, who did she go to? She went to the Pope, right? Who at this time was the one who gave sovereignty over land? It was the Pope. So the Pope decided to split the earth in two and give some to Portugal and some to Spain. So there's uh, I forget the meridian or what the two lines are, but Spain got everything to the west of a certain line, and Portugal got everything south of a certain line. And that's how North America and South America were completely divided originally between Portugal and Spain. Not even just North America and South America, it also included Africa, right? So you also had Portuguese and Spanish trading ports on the coast of Africa. So you go from Pope giving land to the sovereigns of Spain. Sovereigns of Spain then have these conquistadors conquer this land. They give them ownership over land when they achieve certain things. Um, and then you have battles, right? You have the Spanish come in, then you have the British come, then you have the American Revolution, right? It's 1776, War of Independence. What is the War of Independence? It's saying that we don't want Britain anymore, but it's the idea that an independent state is being established. United States. Now Palestine. Let me kind of bring in the mother of the two, Britain, right? So both sides, both the colonization of the United States and the conquest that we're going to talk about now in terms of the Middle East, both occur by Britain. So we have the conquest of the Syria, Bilad al-Sham, of Palestine. When, guys? Come on, guys. 19, exactly. So after World War One, so the fall of the Ottoman Empire led to Sykes-Picot. The land was split up between France, Britain, and France and Britain. There's Russia agreed to Sykes-Picot as well, and this land was split, right? Then amongst the land itself, Britain decided, oh, I want to split this up this way. France got some land and decided to split it up this way. Uh, let's go specifically to Palestine. So what happened with Palestine? So there was something called the British Mandate of Palestine. This was something established not even under the UN. There was something before that called the League of Nations. The League of Nations had something called the Mandate of Palestine. What was this mandate? This was a requirement of the League of Nations. It was created after World War I to try to have like this coalition of nations to agree on certain ways of interacting with each other. The League of Nations decides that after World War I, the conquered lands by France and Britain have to go through a process of going back to the people that inhabit the lands, right? They say you have to do it. World War II happens. Britain is no longer under the control or binding authority of the League of Nations, but there is the UN Charter. And there is a UN Charter to split Palestine in a very specific way. So Britain is occupying land. The UN tells Britain how to split this land. But like something I want you to be very clear about. Conquest is the biggest thing that changes the borders and creates land and makes it come. 1948, 1947 happens. 1948, Britain officially withdraws from the Mandate of Palestine. So think about a perfect example is actually the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, right? So you have this occupation of land by Britain from after World War I till 1948, about 20 years plus or minus of occupation. They're like, we have promised the Jewish people that we were going to give you a nation. This is established in with the United Nations. This is a promise of Britain. They conquered the land. They can do whatever they want with it. Pretty right? That's the going statement on understanding in international law. 1948 happens. Nakba happens. This we all know what happens after that. What I want to just get to when it gets to Palestine is, other than describing this whole process of how a nation is created, is what's going on right now, right? So I want to give you a little bit of history, talk about something that's going on right now, and how we judgment what's going on based off of the values that we have. I'm sure most people disagree with what I just described in terms of how nations are created, right? I think, like the book to that, we kind of feel that people who share a culture should have their own nation, right? That's actually even enshrined in the UN Charter that people have a right to state, to represent themselves. That representation is a very important thing. So it is something that the coalition of nations, the international community, has decided that it is in the interest of humanity that nations are able to represent themselves. And how do you represent yourself? Through a government and a state. 1948 happens. There's this division. The Palestinian state is not established. A Jewish state is established. What happens is the Gaza Strip is occupied by Egypt. The West Bank is occupied by Jordan. Neither one of them gives the Palestinians a nation. So both of them at this point are occupying states. So right. So if you want to look at it in terms of step by step, 1948 we had Britain pull out. It was occupying. It pulled out. The Jewish state is created. A Palestinian state not created. The Arab states instead. Jordan occupies the West Bank. Egypt occupies Gaza. 67. And this is kind of where things get a little weird. 67 happens. Israel occupies the entire thing. Through conquest, they conquer this land. And one of the things that I learned when I was in law school was when I was writing this paper, there's a specific Israeli Supreme Court case about apartheid. Well, they're not. About walls. These separation walls what was the justification for them, right? So a Palestinian farmer actually was able to sue the IDF, and this case got up to the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that the West Bank is under something called uh, 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 belligerent occupation because it was conquered through war. It's under belligerent occupation. They haven't annexed it, so it's not as part of Israel. Um, but they are occupying it, so it's called a belligerent occupation. And the reason I'm gonna bring this all together now, judgment, value, epistemology all together. I learned about the Supreme Court case when I was in law school, and I was writing this paper about the creation of the United States, and then comparing it to the creation and establishment of Israel. And I heard this interview. Everybody, I'm sure, knows Mehdi Hassan. An interview with a recent Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, right? And Mehdi Hassan is actually he quotes that same Israeli Supreme Court case that I referenced, where he says this is belligerent occupation. This is Palestinian land that you are occupying. And then the former Prime Minister of Israel said something very interesting. He was like, "Oh, Mehdi, um, the Bible says it's ours." And then he said, "You," and I think he's alluding to him, you as a Muslim, you and the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims all believe that this is our land. And what is he using as his source of information? Tradition. Right? Tradition. He's using the Torah, the Tanakh, as his source for justifying what he is doing, right? One of the big things that we spoke about last week is about how are we supposed to interact with each other as human beings when it comes to making judgments that might impact someone else. And which one of these things uh, is the one we rely on? Reason. Reason. And I think one of the interesting examples that I was thinking about was uh, like why? Why reason? I kind of want to see if you guys why reason? It's something we share. It's something we can establish as a middle ground between everybody to agree on, right? Even amongst Muslims, our tradition differs. Our tradition differs, right? But certain communities come together and we can agree on a tradition, and that's beautiful. But when you scale out, you're looking at scale, you're looking at diversity, we're looking at how to interact with billions of people. What's the parameter? Yes, reason. And so, what I want to emphasize and what I'm trying to emphasize every week is that we try to use the skills that we have been gaining to better ourselves in our daily life and be able to use reason in a way to strengthen our principles. Because if our principles and our understandings are not based in reason, then it's on shaky ground. So, inshallah, we can have the knowledge and the guidance to understand the value of things to make proper judgment. And thank you all for listening. Assalamu
Thank you so much, Brother Muhammad Ashar. That was awesome. Inshallah, next we will have Brother Ali Mu'mini. He'll give us a historiographical overview of the Zaydis. This is part of a series of the Shia similar sects. Some of them get counted upon the 12 Shias, some of them get conflated with the 12 Shias. We'll be going through several of them. We went through the Ismailis, we went through the Alawis, the Alavis. Inshallah, today we will go through the Zaydis. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Is there a mic I need to use? That was it. Is there a mic I need to use?
Yeah. Keep in mind.
I hold this or? Hey, you can click the now if you'd like. Put this game back and click it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you for showing up. Thank you, Brother Muhammad, for that. I like how you tied it all into Palestine. We've been kind of, getting this sort of thing. We've been talking about epistemology and everything, and then in the end, you tied it into current affairs, which is good. Yeah, thank you very much. Over the last few weeks, we've been speaking about different Shi'i adjacent or Shi'i related groups, different groups who are similar to us, kind of in a kind of get to know your neighbors program, because I think that's always kind of beneficial. So for the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've spoken about groups like the Alevis, the Tashis, the Alamis. Today we'll be talking about the Zaidis, inshallah. So because this is kind of the last group we're talking about, maybe a quick, very, very quick rundown of what we've kind of talked about so far. We said that Shias or Shi'i groups, let's say, can be divided into different kind of categories. Some Shi'i groups believe in the same 12 imams, obviously with us being the majority of them, but also a few other groups. The Alevis of Turkey was the first group that we spoke about. They have the same imams as we do, the same 12 imams, but they differ largely in their practice. So they have these sort of Turkic customs that they have rather than having the Sharia that we maintain. They have their own meetings, their own congregations, their own beliefs. They're kind of an ethnic group of their own to an extent. The Bektashis, who are a little bit similar to them in that they kind of come from the same country of origin, are a Sufi order. They once made up the Ottoman elite fighting forces, but they have many of the same beliefs that we do. They are Twelvers in that they affirm the same imams that we have, but they also carry forth the practices in the Sharia that we have as well. But they're a Sufi order. So that's really kind of the big differentiation between them and us and all that that comes with. Did you have a question? Oh, sure, yeah. Then we also spoke about the Alawis, historically known as the Nusayris, who are people who live in Syria. Historically, they've been kind of designated as a Ghulat group or an exaggerationist group. They believe that Imam Ali is an emanation of God historically, but in the modern context, they usually deny that and kind of affirm themselves to be Orthodox Shia. And so that's why they've been recently kind of classified as Muslim by the scholars, something that they haven't always been given that title of. We also spoke about the Ismailis, who have a different set of imams. They split with the rest of the Imami groups after the time of, or during the lifetime of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, in which they accepted his son Ismail rather than Imam Musa al-Qadim as his rightful successor. So they are the second largest group of Shia in the world. It was them who ruled the Egyptian-based Fatimid Caliphate, which went from Morocco to Hejaz in Syria. They have a Neoplatonic theology, so they believe in ideas that are inspired by Greek philosophy. They believe that God emanates the universe through various stages. And they themselves are a very batini or esoteric group. So they don't believe in an exoteric or literal or zahiri kind of interpretation of the Quran. For them, everything has an inner meaning to it. And so because of this, they're split into two different major factions. The Nizaris on one hand and the Tayyibis on the other hand. Most Ismailis today are known as Nizaris. They follow someone known as the Aga Khan. You might have seen him. He is an apparent imam for them. He's the 49th of their imams. He is someone that you can see. He goes to charity events. Yes.
There are like a sect of Ismaili Shias in the 11th century that were part of it, like assassins,
Yeah.
part of Persia as well.
Yeah, exactly. Those were the Nizaris. So, yeah, it came about from a split in the Fatimid kind of caliphate. They went to Iran. They established an order of assassins based off the word Hashashin, kind of allegation against them, where they assassinated their political enemies and
little states in Iran and Syria. They operated in secrecy, yeah. And it was there that their imams kind of lived and worked. At various times they went into taqiyya and out of it. But today, again, Nizaris believe in the Aga Khan. They also have kind of abrogated the Sharia. They've kind of done away with it or rejected it because they believe that we're in the Qiyamah kind of period right now, as opposed to in the future. And so in our period, in our era, we don't need Sharia. We can do dua instead of salah. Like there are different kind of rulings for the period that we're in. The other group of Ismailis, the Tayyibids, who are most commonly represented by the Dawoodi Bohras, which is a group in India, as well as the Sulaymanis, which is a group in kind of the historical Yemen region. They have a lot of the same beliefs as the Nizaris, but they have a different imam, an imam whose name was Abu al-Qasim al-Tayyib, who supposedly went into ghaiba, into occultation, about 1,000 years ago. Their belief is that these imams have had their posterity in hiding for the last 1,000 years, and their groups are represented by someone known as a Da'i al-Mutlaq, who is a chief missionary who's in contact with these imams for the community. The big difference between them and the Nizaris is that they have the Sharia preserved. So they pray, they fast, they go on Hajj. In fact, if you go to Karbala and Najaf, if you go to pilgrimage in Iraq, you can probably see the Bohras there. They're kind of recognizable from their clothing. So tonight, inshallah, I'll focus a little bit on the Zaidis. So what's the big difference between the Zaidis and then the other groups that we've spoken about? So the Twelvers, which is us, and the Ismailis both believe in Nas. So that's kind of divine appointment of the Imams, an infallible Imam, by a previous Imam. The Zaidis, on the other hand, have a very different view of Imamate, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So to understand Zaidi belief about the Imamate and how they differ from the other Shia, it's important to look at the origins of the sect. So the Zaidis are named after a figure named Zayd bin Ali. Part of Zayd. Yeah. Zayd was the son of Imam al-Sajjad, alayhi salam, and he was the half-brother of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, alayhi salam. In 122 after the Hijrah, so about 740 Gregorian, he led a revolt against the Umayyads within Iraq. And so he was able to secure about 15,000 pledges from local people around Iraq, in Basra and Kufa and Mosul. But whenever it came down to it, he was largely deserted in his revolt. So he was kind of deserted, abandoned, and therefore his revolt failed. Him and his followers that remained were killed. His body was exhumed, brought up from its grave by the Umayyads. He was crucified. His body was crucified. And eventually, after the death of that caliph who was in charge then, his body was crucified for 3 years on a cross. His body was then burned, and the ashes were scattered in the Euphrates River. So this sort of formative experience kind of propelled the Zaidi movement to become what it was. Now, people reacted differently to the Zaidis. Obviously, the Umayyads were very much against any sort of revolt, but there were many people who were not considered to be Shia or who were not considered to be Zaidi who supported Zayd, like Abu Hanifa, for instance. Abu Hanifa was, the most famous, Sunni jurist, you could say, or one of the 4 imams of the Madahib. He, in fact, actually supported Zayd's revolt. So widespread support, but it didn't really kind of culminate in much. So it was through this sort of experience that, kind of formed the Zaidi imamate and what that was. So as opposed to the use of Nas, right? Zaydis believe that anyone from the progeny of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam or Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, anyone from their descendants can become an imam or can be an imam, right? So long as they are a qualified scholar, pious, and they call for a revolt against an unjust ruler or tyrant. So any sort of Sayyid can become an imam. And these imams are not necessarily infallible, nor do they have like divinely given knowledge or something to that extent. They can learn from someone else. So they're essentially normal people, I guess as opposed to our belief, that kind of can come into the role of imamate. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
Before you move forward, so did Zayd himself claim to be an imam, or it was just after his death that a group of people decided, hey, let's pick this guy?
After his death.
Okay, so he himself did not.
He didn't claim to be an imam according to our beliefs, because he was someone who uh, had respect for the imams, loved the imams, in fact, wanted to place them in positions of power as opposed to the Umayyads. But these followers named themselves after Zayd rather than him leading a sort of belief that he was the imam of the time. And in fact, we have narrations of our own imams praising Zayd and narrating him as a I think Imam Rida alayhi salam has narrations that he was a very pious person. So it was after this group and during this time that you have two major groups being kind of brought forward. And this kind of accounts for the differences that you see in Zaydi thought today. You've got the Batris on one side and the Jarudis on another side. These were two major groups that were going on during that time. The Batris were a group that were closer to what we would know as the proto-Sunni kind of viewpoint. And here's what I mean by that. They believed that Imam Ali alayhi salam was implicitly designated as Khalifa, not explicitly or openly, right? They also believed that the first two caliphs shouldn't be condemned as usurpers, but rather be seen as people who made mistakes. And so we shouldn't go far in accusing them of anything. And that while they were mistaken, we can accept them. They also rejected the idea of raj'ah, which is, the return of individuals at the end of times who were oppressed to kind of avenge that oppression. They also rejected the idea of taqiyya. They also rejected bada, right? So that, God revealing his decision after people thought that, he had made that apparent, or they thought that they knew what it was. So the other group, the Jarudis, believed that Imam Ali was explicitly appointed. They were basically an opposite or in contrast to the Batris. They were closer to the Shia of their time. They thought that Imam Ali was explicitly appointed as Khalifa. They believed that Abu Bakr and Umar, that the first two caliphs, should be condemned for being caliphs, and that Raj'ah, Taqiyya, and Bada are valid beliefs that Muslims can hold. So in the early days of the Zaydis, they were more inclined towards the former, more Sunni inclined group. As time went on, though, the Jarudis or the more Shia inclined group kind of took over. And that's kind of how it was for several hundreds of years. So,
Where were they located?
and this time, usually in Hijaz in Iraq. So it would be later on that they would kind of spread out, So it was actually during this time that you have several pro Ali, I guess you could say, those who are Alawis, those descendants of Imam Ali, those descendants of his led revolts against the Umayyads and the Abbasids, right? Largely in Hijaz and in Kufa. So they were largely kind of done by the descendants of Imam al-Hassan, right, as opposed to the descendants of Imam al-Hussein. The descendants of Imam al-Hassan usually were the ones who started revolts, who led the revolts, who participated in them. Famous ones among those are the revolt of Muhammad Nafs al-Zakiyya, if you might have heard of him, that was in Kufa. And most famously, the revolt in 786 AD. During that period, a revolt was staged in Medina against the Abbasids, in which the rebels, following a man named Hussein bin Ali, who was a descendant of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, they seized the Prophet's masjid. They seized Masjid al-Nabawi. And it was here that Imam Musa al-Kadhim actually warned them of their deaths and their fate. But they continued on with their revolt. And in fact, there have been kind of different viewpoints on the revolt by 12 scholars, but the majority opinion is that the Imams condoned or accepted or supported the revolt. And I could correct me if I'm mistaken, but they supported it, but kind of told them of what was going to happen at the end of it all. They fought the Abbasids in Medina for about 11 days, but they couldn't get the support of the people of Medina. So they fled, about 300 of them, south to Mecca. And it was in Mecca where they happened to be confronted by Abbasid princes who were returning from Hajj with their caravans of soldiers who protect them from Bedouin attacks, and the Battle of Fakh occurred outside of Mecca. And so the Battle of Fakh in the time period was generally regarded as kind of the second Karbala in a way, in terms of the devastation it had on the family or descendants of Imam Ali. Now it's a name that's kind of lost to history for many of us, but back then it was a very big deal. Hundreds of people on the battlefield, but ultimately it culminated in the Abbasid victory. So the Abbasids won, and the people who participated in the revolt were killed. If they were captured, they would be executed or sent around to different parts of the caliphate to be executed as a show of force. But some of them actually managed to survive and escape. Most notably, a man named Idris, who was a descendant of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, brother of Muhammad Nafs al-Zakiyya. He ended up fleeing to the very far edge of the Muslim world, which at the time was Morocco. So he fled to Morocco. He ingratiated himself amongst Berber tribes over there. He gained their support. He intermarried with them. And he ended up founding what would come to be known as the first Moroccan state. So the foundation of the country of Morocco can be tied back to Idris, known as in Morocco as Mola Idris, who was a Zaidi who escaped that battle in the Hijaz in Mecca in the 8th century AD. He was eventually poisoned on the orders of Harun al-Rashid, who didn't want the establishment of the state. His son was able to continue it for a while, but eventually it was overtaken. Yeah.
So at this time, all these revolts that you're referring to were by Zaidis?
Zaidis, yes.
So are you saying that a lot of the descendants of Imam Ali were Zaidis at the
Yes.
time?
Yeah. From Imam Hassan's particularly.
It was a popular, was it like a popular movement?
Movement, yeah. So not all of the descendants were Zaidi in terms of religion, I guess you could say. Their followers were. Usually the descendants of Imam al-Hassan typically cluster around this idea that we need to take up arms against the government, right? As opposed to focusing on particularly religious, studies or something to that extent, So that kind of militaristic characteristic of the Hassanid branch was there in the 8th century kind of era. Yeah. So Idris fled there. He established Morocco. His brother Yahya, like many others, fled east to Iran, to northern Iran, to the areas of Mazandaran, Gilan, Tabaristan. These were heavily forested areas where they were out of the kind of watchful eye of the Abbasids. In fact, this sort of area of northern Iran was not even fully Muslim or mostly Muslim at the point. It was largely Zoroastrian because it was so hard to move to. And these Zaidi descendants of Imam Hassan eventually started their own dynasties as warlords, and they would even compete and fight against each other after a point of time. And so they had kind of held control over this area until about 600 years ago or so. So for quite some time. So it was the people, like the average person. There was a Zaidi population there until several hundred years ago, but most people, that's a good question. I know that in the 900s, that northern region of Iran was still considered to be kind of a Zoroastrian area, in comparison to other. They did, but they went there even before the 900s. They were there in the 1800s. Yeah. So they even competed against Zoroastrian warlords and people clinging onto power from the old kind of days. Yeah, sorry about that.
So where did the sects of Zaidi guys were like Sunni, right?
Yeah.
Zaidis go to Ziyara, Kabbalah, Najaf, because usually people that go to Ziyara are usually Dover Shias or Jafaris, Ismailis, but I've never, heard people from Zaidi go to Kabbalah or Najaf.
That's a good question. I'm not totally sure, but I know that their ways of commemorating things like Ashura are different. They don't view it as intense of a light. Yeah. They don't view it as intensely as we do, from what I've heard. As intensely as we do. This sort of Ashura and Karbala dynamic. Yemen. So it was actually in Yemen where they established themselves in the 900s, and which is where really all of them are today. So really the only Zaidis that you see today are in Yemen, as well as in Najran, which is in southern Saudi Arabia. They merged to an extent, but largely, and that's an interesting one. I'm going to get to that because they kind of have that back and forth dynamic in a way. Today, the most famous Zaidis are those who belong to the Houthi movement of Yemen. Those are Zaidis. who obviously have been in the news in recent times.
You know, I've never seen they talk about like like conversations that we have, like as Jafari Shias, Tomer Shias. You know, we talk about the same things that we do. I've never seen like a Zaidi scholar talk about, for example, the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, for example.
Yeah, they have a long history of revolts. For us, Karbala was a very big revolt, but for them, they've had several other revolts and massacres. So for us, the revolt of Fakh or Muhammad Nafs Zakiya is not really um, as important or commemorated. It's not within our tradition. But they also have a different view of the imam, right? So our imams are infallible, divinely appointed imams. For them, they are people who took a stand. So they're not imams like our imams. So the significance of that event for them is perhaps not as important, I guess you could say. As Ma'sumin?
Yeah, do they think that the Prophet of Imam Hassan Hussein, Hazrat Fatima, are Masoom?
That's a
I
good,
know they don't believe in the Masoom after that.
yeah,
So are the first five Masoom?
that's a good question. Because there's not, I looked into that, but I didn't find too much. Because
Yes,
they do, as Ahlul Kisa, as infallible. What about Imam Sajjad, for instance?
Imam Sajjad, I think that they do. So basically, after the first five, Ahlul Kitab, they believe then you have to be a sort of armed revolt.
Okay.
Criteria. So for Imam Sajjad, they say that actually he fought in Ashura.
In Ashura. Okay.
They count they count his fighting in Ashura as qualifying him to be an imam. Basically.
Because I know they don't accept. I've heard that they accept Imam al-Rida actually as a Imam al-Rida as an imam, but not like Imam al-Qadim, for instance. Like in terms of our imams.
Yeah, actually, so there's kind of disputes because it depends on whether they because they don't they sort of have a problem when an imam does taqiyya publicly and kind of
Yeah.
doesn't make the truth apparent. That's for them. That's like, oh, that is a big no because they're very against taqiyya.
Yeah.
So, for instance, Imam al-Kazim, they actually say actually many Zaydis they accept Imam al-Kazim because they say that he actually took a stand against Harun. In many situations, he actually was very very firm with Harun about him having the right of Khilafah. So, for instance, Harun came to him and said that if we wanted to give you back the kingdom of Fadak, we wanted to give you back Fadak, what would be its barriers? What would be its parameters, right? So the Imam told him the entirety of your kingdom, basically. It was going to be, if you wanted to give back our haq, give us back the whole thing.
All of
Give
it,
back
yeah.
your whole kingdom to us. So he was like very open with like the extent of your whole kingdom belongs to us. So that to them was a sort of way of Imam al-Kazim showing like confrontation,
Confrontation.
against Harun. So because of that, they consider him an imam. Same way Imam al-Rida, him basically making the truth known in front of the people, right?
Yeah.
That he should be the Khalifa, or he should also have this position of Wilayat al-Ahad, that he should be the successor. That to them is a sign that, you're not doing taqiyya about this. You're coming out clearly that the haqq belongs to the family of the Prophet, right? So that is sort of the gist of their argument. And that's why you'll see even amongst them, they'll have like disputes, like where they actually respect all of our imams. Though. They respect all of our imams, but they don't consider them imams in their sense because they actually do believe you need to have some type of full uprising
Revolt.
against the Khalifas to count for that. So but yeah, I mean as far as the question about whether they go to the graves or they do commemorate Ashura. Actually, they look at Imam Hussein as one of their pioneers, right? Because he stood
He
against
started the revolt,
he
kind of
stood
thing.
against Yazid, of course. So of course they look at him with the highest regard. But I think of a lot of our other imams, they kind of downplay their significance. They respect them and they consider them scholars and pious, but they don't consider them imams in their proper sense, the way that we we would look at at an imam, right? And even with like their imam has that idea of imamah for them is very different from the significance it holds for us. Because when we think about imams, we think about infallibles, like you said, whereas they don't really have that idea.
It's a different framework that they're working with. Yeah. It's funny that, yeah, Hassan, thank you. That thing about Fadak is interesting. It reminds me of when Umar bin Abdul Aziz, the Umayyad, Khalifa, he returned Fadak to the Ahlul Bayt. And then someone asked the Imam, what should we think of him? And he said, the people will praise him or pray for him in the land because he was righteous, but the angels in heaven will curse him. Yeah, because he still is usurping our right. Yeah, Hassan, thank you.
He kept all the positions.
He still kept that, yeah, that caliphate.
Omar Abdulaziz. I think he was killed. Yeah, they assassinated by the Umayyads. Because there's suspicion that he was actually a Shi'i.
It's too good.
He was too good for his own good.
I've heard that about Yazid's son. I don't know if that's true. Yeah,
Yazid,
he was
yeah, he was a Shi'i.
for like a young.
They
Yeah,
say.
he was Khalifa, I think, for like a year or something.
Wow.
Yeah, Ahsan, thank you. No, no, no. So basically, in conclusion, how do we get to the point where um, they were largely Shia leaning for much of their history, but nowadays we kind of associate them as people who, um, don't condemn, the caliphs for usurping any sort of caliphate. Much of it traces back to a man named Ash-Shawkani who lived in the 19th, 18th century Gregorian, so 200, 300 years ago in Yemen. He was born as a Zaidi. He later became an Athari Sunni in his lifetime. And he was a very prolific scholar, um, probably influenced by the Wahhabi movement to the north in Saudi Arabia. He ended up getting appointed to be the chief judge of Yemen. And so it's through this that he was actually able to influence the Zaidi religion and kind of bring it closer to Sunni thought, to kind of, I guess, what we see it today.
Has there been a reversal of that recently?
Yeah, yeah, there has been, and that's been largely in the efforts of the Houthi movement. So it's the Houthis who have kind of tried to um, steer the Zaydis away from the kind of Sunnification process that started in the 1800s towards a sort of Jarudi leaning, so that old group that was more, uh, similar to the Shia, other Shia groups. In fact, members of the Houthi movement, like Abdul Malik and Hussein al-Houthi, they both lived in Qom and studied in Qom themselves. So essentially, the big difference between the Zaydis, as Dr. Muhammad pointed out, between the Zaydis and the other groups of Shias, is their view of the Imams. They have a totally different framework. They don't believe in an infallible, divinely appointed imamate for their Imams. It's someone who can claim that position. You can have multiple Imams at the same time as long as they're in different lands or regions or countries, because they're simply people who are pious, learned, Sayyids, and kind of stage their revolts or speak out or kind of oppose the tyrants of their time, I suppose you could say.
I also read that that's why they loved Imam Khomeini, because Imam Khomeini was harsh on so that's why that's what sparked them the connection.
Yeah.
Right. That's why they went to Qom. A lot of them. That's what Badreddin Houthi, the founder of Shabab al-Mujahideen, or whatever it's called, the movement, which ended up leading to the Houthi movement. Yeah, he started that in I think 80s or 90s, right?
Yeah, about 90s, yeah, 80s, 90s.
So that's how it's all linked into the axis.
I have a question real quick. How do they kind of decide whether someone is it like a group vote, or they all just choose whether someone can be called imam or is qualified enough to be called imam?
Yeah, historically, there have been disputes about this, but they've done it through consensus, actually, of scholars, ijma. Yeah. So sometimes they've had a vote, if I'm not mistaken, in the past where scholars agree that someone is the imam or is qualified to be the imam.
Sets them that believe a certain principle is Imam, and another like sect of Zaidi where they don't believe that person is Imam, or is it pretty unanimous when someone decides, there's no arguments, once it's decided someone's Imam, that person is Imam?
I think that's a good question, but I think that, and I could be mistaken, but the idea is that since they don't believe in a divinely appointed imam, um, the sort of succession dispute is not really there as much because it's not about succession necessarily. Um, it's about, yeah, it's about controlling power and authority over territory. Yeah, because like in our kind of belief in the Ismailis, um, that line is very important, right? There can only be one in the world, and there has to be one at every point in time, right? Um, so I mean, you can have one in Yemen, you can have one in Iran. Technically, if you're different countries, because yeah, the conception's very different.
I guess, but that piece is probably the thing that makes them most closest to the Islamic brothers.
Yeah,
That part about wilaya and the authority isn't something that's divine. It's something that is consensus, right? And you can't really make a complaint about,
Yeah, they've often been described as the closest Shia to the Sunnis, which is complicated. It's a complicated statement behind that, because Twelvers and Zaidis have not historically got along too well. It's been a pretty tense relationship over history, except for in more recent times. Thank you. Salawat.
Thank you, Brother Ali. Unfortunately, this may be the last time for now that Brother Ali gives us a lecture. No, 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 unfortunately. Oh, there's no more? But you're here for, you said you're here for one more week, is that correct? 2 more weeks. So we have 2 more lectures out of you. Alhamdulillah. No, maybe. All right, maybe at least, maybe one more, maybe, because I was really sad because it's gonna be bittersweet. Unfortunately or fortunately, he's going. Yeah, he's moving. Alhamdulillah. Right when we were getting started. Alhamdulillah. Anyway, it's all right. He said he might be back, inshallah. But anyway, all right. So we'll continue, inshallah. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. And then whoever's online, sorry about the camera troubles. We're gonna fix it. Unfortunately, camera dies fast, but we'll fix it for you. Next we have Dr. Muhammad Ja'far. We're gonna continue our Tawheed series, and today the topic is gonna be proof of Allah through contingency or dependence on contingency. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Put that you're talking.
book, if you guys are following along, you'll be lessons 5, 6, and 7. Uh, in the book. And in these 3 lessons, he's actually covering proofs for the existence of God, right? And I titled this one in particular, the argument for contingency. That's actually chapter 7. So he's going to go in a lot more detail about that. But I want to start with chapter 5. He talks about a different dalil for God's existence in chapter 5, a different one in chapter 6, and then finally chapter 7 is kind of the culmination where you get very detailed proofs of God's existence, right? So I want to show all 3 proofs. Starting from chapter 5, he goes to argument called dalil al-fitra, right? So what does dalil al-fitra mean? You guys know?
Your nature.
What do you mean?
What's inside you? Nature.
Dalil al-fitra, yes. So can someone define fitra for me? That's very hard.
Oh yeah.
What do you mean by instinct?
DNA.
It's in your DNA, right? Allah's designed it as part of His creation, right? There's a verse, "Aqim wajhaka lid-dini hanifan fitrat Allahi allati fatara an-nasa 'alayha." What does that fatara an-nasa 'alayha mean? It means that Allah has actually, basically, this verse is saying, establish your faith towards that the religion in an absolute upright way, right? And this is the fitrah. This is the nature that God has originated man upon, right? So fitrah has this meaning of origination, right, or creation. So in the actual sort of like Brother Shahar said, the DNA, you can think of it in that way, but for the actual nature of the human being, this proof has been made, right? This proof has been sort of installed in every human being, right? So what exactly is this? So in what way is this? Can you understand this, right? So there's a very beautiful verse in the Quran. It says, "قالت لهم رسلهم أفي الله شك," right? So this is I'm gonna just write this. أفي الله شك, right? You guys know what that means?
God in doubt.
أفي الله شك. Yes. Is there any doubt about God, right? So so this actually is one of the proofs that the messengers of Allah, right? They're quoted in the Quran as bringing to their people, right? And they tell their people, is there any doubt about God, right? So in what way are they saying this? Let's try to understand that a little bit. What do you guys think?
Well, how they're saying it?
Yeah, like the messengers of God, they're coming to people and they're giving them this rhetorical question. Is there any doubt about God? Like, in what way? Like why is that question powerful?
Because he's trying to shake them. They can't say no.
Because it's appealing to
Because
your conscience.
they're going to say yes. There is no doubt about
your
God.
inner conscience. It's saying that, like,
Don't lie to yourself.
like, don't lie to yourself. This is something that's inside you, right? That you recognize God. It's the natural instinct, right? Is there any doubt that you can even possibly have about this, right? So this is the argument that the messengers of God are bringing to them, right? And so, how do you guys think that this is something ingrained within us? What way?
Well, we made agreement with Allah and before our spirits were made.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
There was a covenant that took place before the creation.
Yes.
So that's probably one of the
I guess
natural
that's very based on Iman or very Iman type.
Yeah.
But in the sense of how would you let's say logically
I was
we're talking about that.
I was actually going to connect. You said continue and making how this connection.
Okay.
So the idea that I because I don't know the idea is that I have dealt with myself where I come how I came to be, but there has to be firm thing close can't have doubt.
Right. Yeah, that's a very beautiful. That's actually your argument goes with something that Sina has in I think called Quran completely. That basically it's like God is like it's like questioning God is like basically
questioning sons, right? It's such an apparent thing. It's so blatantly obvious that you must be stupid to even question that it exists, right? So that's sort of his way of formulating, right? That God is even more more established, more down. Anything else. He's more firm than anything else. Everything else in the world is dynamic. God is firm. How can you possibly doubt something which is firm? You can doubt anything that's dynamic, but something that's firm, it's not possible to doubt. That's a beautiful way of saying it. But I think one thing here, okay, so Afillahi Shak, in what way we would say that basically this is the way that Sheikh Misbah frames it, right? He says that when you look at basically all human societies, you see that they have a natural inclination towards religion, towards the idea of a higher being, a higher power, right? And this is the core instinct that every human society has, that we naturally incline ourselves towards, like the Quran says, you naturally incline yourself towards a belief that there is a higher power, right? So that is naturally built within us. And that's why these prophets, they're coming to the people and they're saying, is there any doubt about God? Like how can you possibly even fathom a doubt about this? You yourself are naturally turning towards a higher power. And we know there's this very famous hadith, right? You guys have all heard of where an atheist, right, Ibn Hujjat, very famous atheist, he comes to Imam and he says, like, what's the proof of God's existence, right? So the Imam tells him, look, I'm going to give you a proof from your actual inner nature, right? And what was the proof that he gave? You guys probably know. Can someone tell me?
Like the wager? Like
not the wager.
no game.
Not the game theory. Yeah, it is. There was actually a proof that the Imam gave him from something experiential.
Was it when you're drowning in the sea?
Yeah. So he told him, have you ever been in the middle of the sea, right? In an ocean, there was just you, there was no other people around you, no other boats. You were there, for instance, on a merchant, going on a merchant ship, in the middle of the sea, nothing, there's no one around to help you. And all of a sudden, a storm comes, right? And you're about on the verge of drowning. You think you're about to die, right? And then you call out to a being. You call out to a higher power that, oh, if you're there, please save me. Has that ever happened to you? So actually, this is very beautiful because how frequently does that happen to someone? This actually shows that Imam had knowledge about this person's life and knew that Ibn Hujjat had this experience, right? So, because for the Imam to pinpoint this specifically for him, and give him these details, right? And he's like, yeah, actually, that has happened, right? It's like, well, the Imam actually he must have more knowledge, right? To be able to give this example. But in any case, he gave him an example that's experiential, right? That have you ever had that moment? And then in that moment when you lost hope in everything, right? Then you turn to a supernatural power. That is Allah, right? So that's the argument from that all of us, we have this natural inclination towards a higher power. Now that's not enough to take you towards, Islam, right? It's not enough like, oh, I have my fitrah, I'm already a Muslim. Maybe in a very incomplete sense, but to reach the perfection of Islam as Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought, you need to take further steps, right? You need to do ikmal and aql. You need to perfect your intellect beyond that, right? But naturally, Allah has put this seed in every person, right? That you naturally find yourself inclined towards a higher power, believing in a higher power. So this is the first point that Sheikh Misbah makes, right? So the second one is, we call it Burhan and Nazm. You guys know what that means? Burhan and Nazm. So, argument from design, right? So he says that this is, so Dalil al-Fitra, this is like for the simplest person, right? Person in a village has absolutely no access to anything, right? This instinct that Allah has put, that's already a source of guidance that Allah has already put, right, in a human being. But the second argument is kind of for a little bit of a higher level person, right? Burhanun Nazm. And what does this mean? And what exactly can someone
explain it a little bit further. The argument from design. Argument. Well, just write it out.
That the way reality is structured, that it's not that it has to design in a specific way, acts in a specific way.
The trademark of the Lego is always on there. There's always like a trademark of God on it. It's all,
Yes, designed in a very specific way.
all
It could be
synchronous.
different, but it's this way.
Yeah. So argument from design, it's actually quite simple, right? And Brother Shah, mashallah, already alluded to it, and many other brothers here. But basically, if you have perfection, that perfection must have come from somewhere, right? If you have design, you have something that's symmetrical, something that is organized. That organization must have come from somewhere. So it's quite a simple concept. I mean, let's take this specific building we're in. If somebody told you this building came out of nothing, someone snapped their fingers and it came to be, would you believe that? Obviously not, right? You would say there had to have been some designers that came through and actually put all these pieces together. Even things as simple as a water bottle, for instance. You know that water bottle cannot have originated from a vacuum. There must have been certain factors that came together. There must have been someone in particular that designed this in order for it to be in front of you, right? So same type of thing with God. Yeah.
I don't know if this is. I think I mentioned across the river and there was no boat. Right, why there was no boat. I was waiting for it to pop up.
Yeah.
That was why I was late. That was his proof that there was boats don't jump out of nowhere, worlds don't come out of nowhere.
Yeah. So yeah, beautiful example there as well. So argument from design, and this is actually mentioned in the Quran. So Allah says, "Sanurihim ayatina fil afaq wa fi anfusihim hatta yatabayyana lahum annahu al-haq." Right? That we will show them our signs from in the horizons and within their own selves until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. Right? So what does this mean? That this means God has put signs all around us, within our own selves. Even when you look at your own body and you see how it's been designed, how God has put all of these elements in your body to make you function properly. You know that this cannot have come out of nothing. It cannot have come out from a void, right? So immediately, even just looking at your own self, reflecting on your own creation, takes you towards God. Same thing, looking at the world around you, looking at the horizons, looking at the heavens. You immediately start to notice the structure that God has put. And that tells you, okay, there must have been a creator, right? So this is the argument from design. So does that make sense to everybody? So that's an argument that some people, right, some atheists in particular, they try to cast aspersions here with the argument of design, right? Say, oh, what design? There's something called entropy. You can have some order in some part of the universe, but then in the other parts of the universe, there's a whole bunch of chaos and disorder. Sometimes there's just some little bit. When entropy is such, you have all these molecules,
disabilities, cancer,
yeah,
imperfections,
and then there you go, yeah.
People,
Like what type of we could imagine, like, look at how the eye has been created. It's so imperfect. Like, the photoreceptors are in the back. It should be in the front. It doesn't make any sense. Like, the whole creation is like
see backwards.
we're seeing all these defects. You guys see perfection. Perfection is a subjective thing. So they try to cast aspersions from the argument from design. But for a person with a rational mind who's actually thinking, right? And actually, they say, oh, art is subjective. Aesthetics is subjective. Looking at things and saying, oh, symmetry, it's all subjective, right? So this is an argument a lot of atheists try to cast aspersions here. And so because of that, there's a third argument that Sheikh Misbah expounds upon, right? So we'll go into detail on that, Brother Abdul.
I think there's a second thing they also argue with the design thing. It's like they see you're conflating, making a false comparison. Where you're saying, if a watch was made by a human, you can't make the logical jump saying that the universe was made by something. Right? You're saying that just because you made a watch, you can't make that logical jump to just say that something else was made by something else.
Yeah.
Induction proof.
Yeah.
So you can't
They're saying
apply it.
just because you experienced that empirically, you can't say that this was also empirically experienced.
Talk about induction.
So that's another
Yes,
way.
induction and deduction, right? That you're jumping from a specific instance, and now you're going into you're inducing something, right? You're saying, okay, I'm gonna induce this idea, right? That specifically that God must have also been the creator, the originator of the universe. So yeah, I mean,
But it's sound logic. So induction is not improper logic. So it's not
Their whole life is
not-
induction.
Yeah, so you're not making but like it's acceptable. It's a reasonable logical conclusion.
yeah, I mean, so there's a whole bunch of arguments that they have sort of specific contentions against the argument from design, right? And we could go through all of them and refute them in detail, but Sheikh Misbah actually takes a different approach. So he says, look, I'm going to tell you the argument, but I'm going to give you now an argument that's even more foolproof, that has no room for doubt, right? So inshallah, please recite a salawat and we'll talk about that. Okay, so all right, so this argument is called Burhan al-Imkan. Okay, does anybody know what that means? Burhan al-Imkan? Proof of possibility, or we kind of define it as contingency, right? Contingency, and we're going to go into detail a little bit more about what that means, right? So argument from contingency, right? Okay, so what does this is a little bit philosophically like more inclined, so I'm going to just explain it, and then I'm going to tell you guys another argument that you sometimes will see. It's called the argument from causation, right? You might have heard this before. That okay, every effect has a cause, basically, right? So we're going to go into that too and explain kind of the difference and why this argument is far better. The argument from contingency is far better than the argument from causation, right? So, but let me just explain to you kind of, I think the best way is to explain to you the argument from causation and its flaws, and then we'll go through the argument from contingency. So I'll do that first. Okay, so argument from causation, anybody can explain this for me? What's this argument? And what have you guys heard before about how to prove God through the argument from causation?
So the world is seen to be in motion,
Okay.
to be active, and so an active force needs to be acted upon. So it's the thing that is in motion, reality was caused.
Okay, yeah, that's actually called. It's actually argument from huduth, or argument from. But that's still very good. This argument from motion is actually quite good. It's a nice way of phrasing it. Yes, that something which is in motion had to have a basically cause, right? Something that caused it. Yeah, something that was the first mover, right? So that's typically the way it's framed, Brother Muhammad.
It was everything is in motion, and there's one mover that moves, and it was related to the theory of God. That the mover cannot be part of that motion, otherwise it contradicts itself. So it was like basically them saying like there's life in motion, but
Yes. So this first mover idea comes from Aristotle. He's kind of the original expounder of this. So yes, that's very true. So the argument from causation, and just let me explain it to you this way, right? It says every effect has a cause, right? It's a kind of a. I'll write it as a syllogism, right? Remember, you guys remember the syllogism? What a syllogism is? You start from a major premise, a minor premise, and then a conclusion, right? So every effect has a cause. The second is therefore, what's the conclusion? Universe must have a cause, right? Okay, so what do you think atheists have a problem with in this argument?
Defining the universe.
Yeah, so that's one, right? They say, okay, well, how do you know the universe is in effect? Like where's this cause and effect idea? This cause and effect, it's
Be eternal.
yeah, it could be an
The
eternal
universe
thing.
is the cause.
Right.
It is.
So that's one thing that they say. So they actually cast multiple aspersions here. So one argument that they make is exactly what Brother Shire said, that they say, how do you know that the universe is actually in effect? It could be a cause, or it could be it was perpetually there. You're making an assumption by saying the universe is in effect, right? So that's one thing they say. Second thing that they say is this idea that every effect has a cause is problematic in modern physics, right? Because they say quantum physics proves sometimes you can actually have reverse causation. You can actually have an effect before the cause, you know? And so basically this idea of causation, it's something that makes sense to us experientially as humans, but it doesn't actually have a true reality, you know? And especially when you're talking about the Big Bang, that's before all, you know, the macro physics existed. It was only at the level of quantum that we're talking about particles. So it's possible that you know, the laws of causation break down at that level. And so this idea of you know, quantum particles need a cause to make them exist is complete nonsense. You know, so that's one of their arguments that they propose, that causation is dependent upon our understanding of modern physics. You know, so that's one argument that you might see, and if it has flaws, but this is why we're going to talk about contingency, because it actually completely eliminates any doubt when you frame the argument like this. Brother Sarosh, you had a question?
Yeah, it was just sort of like a clarification. I know you said atheist. I think we can make a safe assumption knowing like they really like focus on the science. So I just thought it was weird, like you said, like they would have a disagreement. I think Big Bang is like one of the biggest theories that they like it's true. But isn't that like the biggest evidence of like cause begetting like right? Like wouldn't they like agree? Like if they believe in the Big Bang is the cause of the universe.
Yeah.
So the universe in that sense is an effect.
The Big
of
Bang
the
is
Big
not
Bang.
sound science anymore.
Huh?
I don't know. Big Bang
There's
is
some arguments
much-
against it.
Yeah,
No,
Big Bang
no.
is not as
It is
accepted.
valid science.
But it's not as people are changing their opinion on it.
The theory, as just you said, it's the
People
theory.
are changing.
Are you
their
meaning like
opinion.
string theory? Like that's
No, it's more theory. That there's this. So the thing with the Big Bang, it has certain. You can also believe that there's been hundreds of Big Bangs, infinite number of Big Bangs. There have been contractions and expansions of the universe. Understanding the universe as a single cause for this single.
Yeah, you know, so there's that. There's also the other elements which we didn't discuss, which is, okay, we said God is, let's say God is the first mover, okay? God is the first mover. A very common question, and this is Bertrand Russell, he asked this question. He's like, well then, who made God move, right? Who made God move? If you're going to say that, oh, you know, every effect has a cause, well, what if God's an effect? Then what's his cause? If I propose that God is an effect, then what? People say, well, no, but God by definition is a cause. You know, he's not going to be an effect, right? So it creates a lot of confusion, and that's why I think this argument from causation is just really a bad way to frame your argument, right? So the argument from contingency is a little different, right? And so let me explain it to you this way, okay? So the argument from contingency says philosophically, you can divide all things into three possibilities, everything in existence, right? So something can be what they call wajib, right? Mumkin, or mumtana, right? Yeah, so Brother Shah already defined it. Wajib means necessary, right? Necessary. Mumkin means possible, right? And then mumtani' means impossible. Yeah. So wajib, right, means something which has to exist, right? There's no possibility for it not to exist. It must be, right? Possible, right? Possible means it's contingent, meaning it can be or it cannot be, depending on the circumstances, right? And then impossible means it just cannot be, no matter what the circumstances would be. It just cannot actualize, right? Al-wajib, yeah, but this is wajib, right? So wajid means the originator, right? Wajib means the necessary, right? So, but at least from a philosophical standpoint, does this make sense to you guys? Yes. So what the argument says is this, that everything in existence is mumkin, right?
Everything in our reality.
Everything in our reality is mumkin. Why? Because you can envision a circumstance where it would not come to existence, right? Everything in our existence, for instance, Brother Abdullah, if his parents didn't exist, he wouldn't exist, right? For instance, this building, right? If Florida didn't exist, for instance, this building wouldn't exist, right? So you can imagine a possibility where it wouldn't be, right? So that's basically mumkin. What mumkin means is that it's a contingent existence. Its existence depends upon a number of factors to all come together in the right circumstance for it to be, for it to actually come to existence, right? So I think the best way to explain this is make it a little bit more tangible for you guys. Is let's imagine you have the existence switch, okay? I call it the existence switch, okay? So existence switch. All right. So necessary, right? If we have on off, right? On off, right? There is no off, right? For a necessary existence. For a mumkin, it can be on or off, right? On or off. And for impossible, right, it's by definition always off, right? Does that make sense? So a necessary has to be on the on position. It's always on the on. It can never be on the off, right? So we're saying everything that you can possibly conceive of has to fit into one of these categories, right? And we said all things that we know as human beings that exist amongst us, they're possibilities, right? They're possible. They could be or they couldn't be, depending on the circumstances, right? So now the thing is, by definition, everything is in the off position, right? Everything in our existence is in the off position because it wouldn't be unless the other factors that require it to come into existence were in place, right? So by definition, everything is naturally in the off position, right? So it has to be put on. And what puts it on? Things that are already on, right? Things that are already on have to come together, right? It's like you have a series of switches. All of them are in the off position. How's anything ever going to come on? There's no way, right? There's no way for anything to come on. If everything's in the off position, nothing is going to trigger any of those switches to come on, right? So there has to be an outside force that is on, right? So we said everything in existence is, basically mumkin, right? It could be in the off position. By naturally, everything is in the off position because its existence requires other things to come into existence to make it be in the on position, right? So everything's naturally in the off position. So what's required? Something that is always in the on position, right? So wajibul wujud, something which is is a necessary existence, right? Right? Does that make sense? Wajibul wujud, yes. right? So mumkin al-wujud, so all this is, technically I should put a word al-wujud after all of this, right? Because wajib al-wujud means that which is necessary to exist, right? Mumkin al-wujud, yes, exactly. Mumkin al-wujud is that which is contingent to exist, or that which could be and couldn't be, right? That's all human beings, all existence as we know it, everything in the universe, right? And then mumtani is something which is mumtani al-wujud, something which is impossible to exist, right? So, for instance,
A camel going through a nail of
exactly, like for instance, somebody came to Imam as-Sadiq,
Yazid going to
but somebody came to Imam as-Sadiq once and told him, "Can your Lord make an egg, encompass the entire world, right? The entire world in an egg?" So the Imam said, "Look, Allah is powerful over everything, but what you're asking cannot even exist. It cannot be. You can't make the entire universe fit in an egg. It's not possible, right? So basically, this is mumtana, right? It's impossible to be, right? Or 1 + 3 = 7, for instance. That's not possible, right? Or a square circle. That's not possible. It doesn't make sense, right? No, because
we don't say that, but some of the other brothers
yeah,
that's why that he can do anything.
They have
Because he's
intellect.
Allah.
That is very
See,
important.
now Allah comes in here in this conversation.
Yeah.
That is very important for a reason.
Exactly.
but this mumtani on wujud is a very important concept to understand, that there are things that just cannot be, right? Why? Because it's not because God is deficient, but because the thing itself is deficient.
By definition,
right?
the definition of a thing.
Yeah, the thing itself is contradictory. So you having a square circle is contradictory.
Can
That can't
God
be.
create a stone large enough that he cannot live? The Christians
It's
say that.
it's a nonsense question, right? Because a stone so heavy you can't lift it is a contradiction, right? So yes, but does that make sense to you guys? So now the argument becomes very clear, right? So the argument that's made here is that if you have everything in the off position, by nature, everything by default is in the off position. There's nothing that's going to turn anything on, right? So you have to have a wajib al-wujud, something which is a necessary existence that turns the other switches on, right?
So why does everything have to be in the off position? Why can't they say that the universe was already here? I'm just trying to think. Like
but think about
the other argument.
Forever universe.
That's forever here. So
yeah.
But on the third thing, they can't be. Why can't someone say that?
Well, you see, even the universe itself, right? For Einstein's relativity, they say universe itself depends on time, space, and matter. Right? And all three of them are kind of dependent on each other. Time cannot exist without space and matter, right? And so all three of these actually tie into each other. They're all codependent, right? So they're all contingent things. Time, space, and matter are contingent because they depend on each other. So the question, so they're by nature they can be in the on position and the off position, right?
Is that kind of like relativity?
What's that?
Relativity.
Yeah. That's what relativity has proven. Yeah.
And I guess for the cat, it's either dead or alive.
Yeah.
It has to be one of them.
Right.
And it necessarily has to be one or the other.
Yes. Right. Because it's a binary, right? So, but does that make sense? So the really the gist of this argument is that we completely take out this question of causation because it completely confuses people, right? Don't bring up this, but it's a little bit more philosophically complicated. You guys get it though, right? But something which is necessary is always on the opposition. Something which is mumkin or contingent, it can be in the on position or off position. But by default, it's in the off position. It needs something to put it in the opposition, right? Because it requires certain circumstances to exist for it to be, right? And if those circumstances are not there, then it's going to be in the opposition, right? So because of that, everything that we know of is mumkin, right? And it needs something which is wajib al-wujud, something which is necessary to make it, right? So this basically, wajib al-wujud is the philosophical way of saying God, right? So God is the necessary existence. Everything else is contingent existence, right? And everything that we know of. And then, of course, mumtani al-wujud, those things which just cannot possibly be, right? They're impossibilities. So that in just is the argument. And inshallah,
I think I'll conclude here, unless you guys have any questions.
I got a question.
Yes.
So when you're in this middle position of possibility, right, going off or on, off or on, right? Why are we leaning to off instead of on?
Yeah. So the reason is okay. So let's say it was on the on position, right? What does that imply? If something which is mumkin is in the on position, right? It means that there's something else that has put it in the on position, right? You get what I'm saying?
Unless you claim to be independent.
So what I'm saying is okay. So what?
Something else acted upon it.
Well, the thing is,
reliant on.
yeah. So let's say a switch is on, right? In order for that switch to come on, basically certain circumstances had to exist for that switch to be turned on, right? Those circumstances basically are naturally in the on position, right? They have to be in the on position to make that mumkin and wujud, that thing which is in the off position, go into the on position. So for instance, I'll give an example, Brother Abdullah. Before his birth, he was in the off position, right? His parents were in the on position, right? The circumstances had to all come into fruition in the right proportion for him to come into the on position, right? So now trace this back, right? So everything in existence is like this, right? Everything is naturally in the off position. It doesn't exist unless the circumstances come to fruition that push it in the on position. You have other things that need to be in the on position to make it go from off to on, right? So the whole idea is, but everything by nature is in the off position, right? And that has to be unless let's say you say matter is yeah, right.
It's that idea of not being separate.
Yeah. So this is actually where wahdat al-wujud comes from. This concept of wahdat al-wujud originates from this philosophically.
So the idea that everything is necessary.
No, that the only true existence is the necessary existence. Everything else is contingent, so it doesn't truly exist.
Nothing's real.
Right? Yeah. So this is kind of where philosophically it gets its underpinnings, right? But naturally everything is in the off position, and it's muftaqir, or it's dependent. It's basically needy upon God to bestow upon it existence, right? So, but if you look at it, so this is actually, it's kind of like if you heard of the infinite regression, right? The infinite regression, they say you can't have an endless series of causes, right? You can't have an endless series of causes. There has to be a beginning, right? Otherwise, we'd never get to this point. So this is another way of explaining it, but it's more philosophically involved. But it's foolproof. It cannot be possibly debunked.
Is this something the Muslims came up with, or is this other religions use? Or is this a philosophical idea?
No, this is a philosophical argument built by Muslim philosophers.
By Muslims.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Muslims came up with this.
We all agree on that.
This argument was specifically expounded by Ibn Sina, I believe, was one of the first ones who kind of, and he was kind of Ismaili, but right, yes, but he was one of the first ones who explained this.
It's funny, he was
from argument from contingency standpoint.
He was Ismaili because this concept goes against the Neoplatonic ideas.
Yes, to a certain extent, because they believe, Neoplatonics believes in the first existence, second existence, third existence. They believe like in a whole chain.
I thought that emanation, all existence comes from this necessary.
Yeah, they do, but they believe the emanations take like basically different forms. They actually believe in like the first. So they believe the first cause, the second cause, the third cause. They actually have like 10 different causes that all come out from God, because they have this thing where they say. They have this idea of qa'idatul wahid. Qa'idatul wahid means that God, because God is one, he can only originate one thing. He can only originate one thing directly, because he has no differentiations about it. So that one thing has to be a perfect reflection of God, but it has to have multiplicity within it. And that multiplicity is what originates the entire world. So they actually have a difference between God and the first creation.
So it's kind of a weird. It's really complicated philosophically. Yes, yeah. This An-Nur al-Muhammadi, this idea, yeah.
But the Nur Muhammad does not create the rest of it.
Yeah, so this is actually where a lot of like the Urafa kind of merge with some of the Platonic ideas, and but this is kind of where a lot of the Urafa comes from. If you trace it back, it gets some of its roots from like the teachings of Ibn Sina and Farabi, and then it was advanced by Mullah Sadra and like made more organized by him. But this is the philosophical argument that's actually, if we're going to just keep it very focused in terms of proving God's existence, it's one of the most foolproof ways, right? Because it gets away from all this idea of cause, effect. You completely get rid of these terms. You're talking about contingent and necessary, right? Everything in this universe is contingent, and it requires something which is necessary. Otherwise, it wouldn't be, right? It couldn't exist. If all the switches are on off, what turns it on, right? And everything isn't by nature off unless there's circumstances exist to make it go into the on position, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I had a question. The word used for impossible.
Mumkin.
Okay,
Impossible,
so
impossible.
impossible.
Oh, that's mumtan. Mumtan.
So what I'm trying to say is like, what do you mean by impossible? Like, are you saying like it's always impossible all the time?
Yes.
Regardless?
For instance, we said like a square circle, right? A square
This
circle,
is just rational.
just rationally
This is
impossible,
not
right?
experience at all.
Yeah, because it's contradictory. It's self-contradictory.
Right, because I was thinking like, if you go back like 200 years and you ask them, hey, people they'll probably look at you like, no, that's not
Reason. Not,
right, but then it's possible. Like, the second one, possible. That's experience. That is experience.
Yes.
It doesn't depend on reason.
No. This is rational impossibility. That's what it is.
Rational possibility.
Rational impossibility. So if like for instance, a moon made of cheese, right? A moon made of cheese, it's possible. It could be. It couldn't be. It needs the right circumstances to make it exist, right?
a whole bunch of counts.
Possible. A unicorn is possible, right? You can have the correct mutations that happen to get a horn, flying or something. Sure, you can have a unicorn. Just the fact that actually is a thought in your head, right? Means it actually is it's a possibility.
Right. So the only
Like
thing
if I
the only thing you can't say impossible is any sort of mathematical.
yeah, like if I tell you Father Ali Sorosh, think of a square circle. Can you do it? Can you think of a square circle? It doesn't it's not possible. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yes, mathematics.
Yeah. So it's math. It's actually the law of contradiction. So you can't have something that is and isn't at the same time, right? It's a square and it's not a square at the same
Can
time.
that also be experienced like a cat dog?
Yeah, maybe a cat dog. Yeah, because it's not completely a cat. It's not completely a dog, right?
How can Muawiyah and Imam Ali be good at the same? It's impossible. They can't both be, one's trying to kill the others. I mean,
Yeah.
we make that rational argument that they don't get.
Right.
That's why that's the only thing we can rely on. That's the country between us to rely on. That's why we have.
The reason.
Yeah.
But ultimately, both people have different understandings of tradition. They have their understanding of our.
Or he has experience.
Yeah, everyone experience.
Inshallah, please recite aloud salawat.
Allah.
Oh yeah.
This at the beginning?
Oh, you're very much right.
He's the organizer. Yeah.
we'll take it into consideration. Part of it is also attendance. I try to limit the times, but sometimes I go over and talk and discuss a nice thing. I agree with you.